Our topic this morning is Time of the End or End of Time, Part 4. And as I was coming in this morning, this was actually when we ended last week, we weren't able to finish because I said the time had come and gone, and there was still a lot more to cover. And I didn't want to extend out for a long period of time. And we said, well, we'll come back this week. And it was after service that I had a chance to talk to Brother Joe, and he was suggesting, well, hey, what if maybe we could go into this afternoon, which was last Sabbath, and we said, well, hey, we'll play it by ear, and we'll see what happens, and if we have the time and the opportunity, we will, and if not, then we can do it next week, and that's next week has come for us, but unfortunately, we can go through the service, but the opportunity for him, and it's not. It's a reminder that we do live our lives freely, and we make those assumptions that we can do this later on. We can do this tomorrow. We can do it, whenever, and that is fair. But yet, in this moment, we are reminded of the reality that no, we really don't know. I don't know from this moment to the next moment what it be. But the one thing that we do know is that in Christ, there is the word that then though he died, though she died, yet they will live again. So we want to maybe retrospectively consider and also remember again those promises that are contained in the scriptures that they might give us hope for now and hope for eternity. But as we talk about the time of the end or the end of time, ultimately, it will all come to its grand conclusion. It's like everything will point to that. And so as we've been going through, we're talking about the time of the end or the end of time. We've taken pain to be able to understand and to equate what the scriptures are talking about in the last days. And as you've seen, that expression was used numerous times. And it was also the reality that when the ancients, they spoke about the coming of Christ, they looked forward to it, and they spoke of it as a soon coming event, never setting a time period as it'll be in a couple of weeks, in a few months, or in a year or whatever, but there was the sense of urgency that they had. That also will help to shed light on our conversation, our study today, which by my plan and attempt, we will finish today. And I do want to have a few moments in case there are any questions that you might have that have come up that have been answered, or maybe it's just kind of sparked something else to bring a different piece. So let's start. We'll start with a recap in 1888, some of the things that were happening in the 1880s and the 90s going forward. And I will not go through some of the things that were taking place on various states and the state statutes and laws. We looked at that last week, so we'll not cover that today. One thing we did talk about was that in the federal level that there were agitation for a Sunday rest law. In fact, there were several that would come up. The one most prominent of which was the Blair Sunday Rest Bill, and that was in 1888, and then it came back again in 1889 and 90. It went through that had that shelf life in Congress, and during this time and before this time, there were certain statements that were given to the church. First statement was in Selected Messages, Volume 3, page 383 and 384 that I shared, and I'll again quickly share the second one as well, which is Selected Messages, page 13. I put the year there because it's important to be able to see the context, the understand what were the times and why was this statement given. Like the time is important to be able to understand and to consider that. So the first one was in 1884 that said that many will look away from the present duties and present comforts and blessings and will borrow trouble in regard to the future crisis. This will be making a time of trouble beforehand, and we will receive no grace for any such anticipated trouble. So in 1884, again, a highlight, hey, some are worrying again about the future, continuing to borrow trouble for the future crisis. Of course, the future crisis being impending or the possibility of a national Sunday law, the respective of restriction of religion, chain gangs and so forth. Those things have been experienced by members of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, members of the Seventh-day Baptist Church, some who were Jews, some who were non-believers, Buddhists and so forth, in terms of like main Christendom. So it's an experience that people were dealing with. And the admonition is, again, don't become riled up in that particular. Number 2, in Selected Messages 13, it says that there is a time of trouble that is coming to the people of God, but we're not to keep that constantly before the people and to rein them up to have a time of trouble beforehand. Once again, time is important. This is 1890. Now, if you were to transport yourself back in time, and you would be living in the time in which these things are being considered. The Sunday rest bill is by Senator Blair of New Hampshire, is brought forward to, and it is in committee. And someone were to say to you that there is a time of trouble coming to the people of God, but we're not to keep it constantly before the people, and have them rein them up to have a time of trouble beforehand. If someone were to say that to you, what would you say? Would you probably think they lost their mind? Like you are in this experience, and you have these various things that are taking place in, we talked about California, Arkansas, Alabama. You have things taking place on the state level, and someone were to then say to you that there is a time of trouble that is coming, but we're not to keep this constantly before the people, like continue to rile them up. If they were to say that to you, what would you say? You think they've lost their mind? How can you say this when this is taking place? That would be the reaction that most would have, right? You'd be like, why are you saying this in light of this current action that is taking place? Again, this is 1890, and again, the height of the Blair Bills, 1888, 1890, during this time period. So the question that we would probably ask ourselves or consider is that, well, why is that being stated, right? That is an interesting response. Review and Herald, December the 11th, 1888, we read the following again. It says that we have been looking many years for a Sunday law to be enacted in our land. And now that the movement is right upon us, we ask, what are our people going to do in this matter? Now, so we talked about this, but the thing that we've talked about, it now seems to be unraveling or coming to light right before our eyes. So what are our people to do in this matter? It says that we should especially seek God for grace and power to be given to his people now. God lives, and we do not believe that the time has fully come when he would have our liberties restricted. From our perspective, was the belief then that this is not the time when our liberties will be restricted. Now, I highlighted a couple of things that to consider that now the movement is right upon us. And I want to go over to Genesis chapter 26, a couple of texts of Scripture. Genesis chapter 26, because in reading through the Bible, reading through any work, it's important always to keep in mind the time, the circumstances, like the who, what, when, why, and how, like those questions, like rudimentary to be able to consider and to keep in mind. There are places throughout the Scriptures that it will speak of, and I'll use just a few examples of the reference of this day. Now, when we look at this statement in 1888, you look at other statements, and this one it says that there is a movement that is right now upon us. Typically, when those statements and others are read, we refer those to today. Like we say, hey, this is happening today. So in Genesis 26 and verse 33, it says, So he called it Sheba. Therefore, the name of the city is called what? Beersheba to this day. Is the city of Sheba still called Beersheba to this day? Genesis 35 and verse 20. Genesis 35 and verse 20. Jacob set up a pillar on her grave, which is the pillar of Rachel's grave to this day. So if you're able to find Rachel's grave, are pillars still erected on her grave? Well, the Bible said that it was there to this day. How can that be reconciled? Because you're saying, okay, if you went and you saw the grave, the pillars wouldn't be there. And some might say, well, by some miraculous intervention that those pillars are still standing erect there. But we talked about the land, the country, what it would be called. I said, well, that city's name would even exist to this day. How can it be then? Because here clearly the Bible said that this would exist or this was there to this day. And you're saying, no, that's not the case. Joshua 4 and verse 9. Joshua 4 and verse 9. Joshua chapter 4 and verse 9. The Israelites have come on the other side. They've crossed the Jordan now, and they are to build a memorial. In chapter 4 and verse 9 says, Joshua set up 12 stones in the midst of the Jordan, in the place where the feet of the priests who bore the Ark of the Covenant stood, and they are there to this day. All right, so those stones were set up to this day so that people in Joshua's time and thereafter, they were able to go in and they could look and see 12 stones erected in the center. And it was a reminder of that what they had heard was true. It was there unto this day. In Joshua 7:26. And there are others as well, but this is the final one we'll look at in Joshua 7 and verse 26. After Achan has been stoned, it says in verse 26 that they raised over him a great heap of stones that are still there to this day. So the Lord turned from the fierceness of his anger. Therefore, the name of that place has been called the Valley of Achor to this day. So how then can that be? Are the stones that were used to stone Achan still there today? If we were to travel and go to the Valley of Achor, will we find these stones piled up? If we would go to Rachel's grave, will we find the stones piled up? And we were to go through the Jordan and use sonar to be able to look through and to find, well, we're going to be able to find these evidences of these 12 stones piled up. Are they still there? The answer is no. They're not still there. So how could it be then that they are not still there, but it says that they're there to this day? How can it be? Are these people mistaken? Did Joshua not know what he was talking about? Was Moses misunderstood when he said that it was there to this day? Time and context are always important. So it was true in the time in which it was written. So to use a modern example then, if shortly after or during COVID, when most wore masks, after someone could have written an article that said that the law enforcing wearing a mask or whatever, or social distancing, is still in effect to this day. All right, so that's like, say, 2020, 2021. If you read that article in 2025, would that still be an accurate article? Why? Because the circumstances changed. Does that make it invalid for that time period? No. It was valid in the time period it was written. So like if it's 2020, right, 2021, and it's written during that time period, that's accurate. It's true. But if we're then reading it in some other time period, and we're trying to read it through the lens of what was written then is applicable and taking place now, then we're missing the point. The point that they were establishing is that was then. We're not talking about that what was now. We're speaking of this was true at that particular point in time, okay? So therefore, again, when you look at certain statements and you read through Great Controversy or other books, we start seeing things that will say like now, as in the example here in December 11th, 1888, it says that we've been looking for many years for a Sunday law to be enacted in our land, and now that the movement is right upon us, and then it continues on. The danger is okay, well, you read it as such, and it's happening now. All right, it could be happening now, but it may not be happening now. What does it determine whether it is taking place now? Time and circumstances and conditions, okay? Important to be able to distinguish that. So with that in mind, the question then is why? Well, why was the suggestion then that the time is not now? Now, before I go into that again, this is where we were approximately close to ending when we ended last week. So I looked to find out currently what type of Sunday legislation is presented, and I shared this previously. The one piece that was there on a state level was a desire to be able to pass a bill to bring about Sunday morning closing laws. Now, this had nothing to do with worship. This only had to do with closing the retail and such. And you can see again that it was defeated by a vote of 4-89 in the North Dakota House. So there is no federal or national thrust for Sunday legislation or Sunday sacredness. I decided to have done the research, but let's validate. And as such, I took the moment to reach out to the Public Affairs and Religious Liberty Department for the Pacific Union Conference, as well as to the General Conference to find out, hey, is there any pending Sunday legislation? And their answer was, no. There is no pending Sunday legislation. Well, what about what we hear and that is put forth? So two things we'd like to quickly dissect. One, when Project 2025, I know that has taken a lot of emphasis. I do want to point out that the chief architect behind Project 2025 is a man by the name of Jonathan Berry, who is currently the solicitor for the Department of Labor. He was just confirmed in October. His views in terms of Sunday laws and Sunday sacredness are very extreme. In fact, an article that he wrote, this is what he states regarding Sunday laws or blue laws. Remember, we talked about those blue laws, and we found that they're called blue laws because of what? They were called blue laws because they're written on blue paper, right? No, had nothing at all. They were not written on blue paper. So that's a myth. They were called blue laws because they were simply strict. They were like rigid, puritanical. That's what it meant. It was just a slang expression, a blue in that particular day. So they're called blue laws. They were strict religious laws. That's what the meaning conveys. Of it, though, this is what Berry says. And so he, again, is the solicitor for the Department of Labor. He said, this is in reference to work and such. He writes that the revival of blue laws and other measures to guard Sabbath rest is thus one more example of a prudent policy intervention to protect the subjectivity, the personhood of workers. In other words, he sees blue laws as being like an intricate part of society, like to protect public workers, like the workforce will not necessarily do the right thing. Hopefully they will do the right thing, but a way to be able to safeguard to make sure that this is observed and Sabbath observance is there, then blue laws are a possibility to be able to help to protect the worker. And of course, he is then a person who, as one would say, would have the ear of the president. Now, that does not mean that the president will do what he says. Just simply I'm highlighting that the notion of that there are some who believe in Sunday sacredness to the extent of, well, we need to make it where it is obligatory that you cannot work on Sunday. It must be a day of worship. And certainly in this high-ranking administration official, he holds those views. He espouses those views in terms of Sunday sacredness in respect of blue laws that they could be done, they could be adopted to be able to support it. But whenever we talk about anything in terms of Sunday laws, and this again is from the BRI, this was a statement or work that they had done in reference to said topic of being able to look at Sunday legislation. They highlighted that there are, of course, like 4 steps that they look at to be able to validate. And again, I would encourage us to do the same. You can go online and you'll find, if you go on YouTube, go on any type of social media, there are a number of advocates who within the denomination would say, wait, that there's going to be a Sunday law this year. I've looked at some of the track record, and for the last 5 years, I've seen like the same statements by basically the same people saying the same thing. Sooner or later, it's like gambling. If you keep playing the same number, sooner or later you're going to get it right. Like if you go in every day, and it may be a while before you hit, but sooner or later, the number is going to come up. You keep playing that same number consistently, it's going to show up. But we don't need to guess game with it. So the Office of Public Affairs and Religious Liberty, they are very adamant in terms of doing and keeping a track on what is happening in terms of Sunday legislation. One of the things that came about as a result of the 1880s and 1890s was the Department of Religious Liberty was created within the Seventh-day Adventist Church. The American Centennial, the magazine that we call Liberty Today. All those things were born from it, from the opportunity and the need of saying we need to understand and to see what's taking place in the legislative assemblies, what's happening throughout the country in terms of laws. We want to stand forth for religious liberty. And please keep in mind that religious liberty is not from the perspective of religious liberty as it would suit the Seventh-day Adventists, but it's religious liberty for everyone. So that true religious liberty gives anyone the right to be able to worship or not worship however they so desire. So whether or not they are Baptists or atheists, whether they are Catholic, whether they are Hindu, whether they are Sikh, if they are homosexual, if they are heterosexual, is irrelevant. Religious liberty is afforded then for everyone, so that there's a bastion or a safeguard. And so their whole emphasis is let's be able to share with legislators, let's share with the public so that each one would understand and know that there is truly this principle of separation of church and state. And that whenever the two are commingled, it never ends well. Inevitably, the minority is persecuted behind the majority. And such, they stated again that they had like 4 pieces that they look at, really being able to identify and to see, is there any truth, accuracy, validity to the statements that are being presented, and if there are, then let's look at it. They did research in 2003, and they looked at various laws that were there to be able to find out, and again, at that point, they established again the same piece that there was no pending legislation. Highlighting a couple of pieces we looked at last week as such. You recall that when the Pope came to visit in 2015, you may recall that there were some people who were saying that he is coming to call for a Sunday law. And again, how did they get there? It was the interesting piece. Well, how they got there, because in 2001, when the World Trade Center was attacked, people begin to use that as a time prophecy. You may recall, like in volume 9 of the Testimonies, page 11, it talks about that there were buildings rising in New York, and then there was destruction that came. The firemen were unable to operate their engines, and it talks about then that there would be like a marshaling of the nations and such. So they use that as a basis of saying, well, 2001, that those things took place. And according to the prophecy of Potiphar, or rather Pharaoh, when he saw the vision, there were 7 years of plenty, and then there were 7 years of famine. You recall that. Like he saw the fat calves that came up, and they were devoured by the skinny, and the fat corn came, was devoured by the skinny. And it was a period of sevens. It was 2 sevens, like 7 years of plenty, followed by 7 years of famine. And so if you're doing the math, 2001, and you add 7 years of plenty, that brings you down to 2008. And then if you're looking at the 7 years of plenty ending in 2008, then you would go 7 years forward to bring you down to 2015. It's very interesting in all of these different things because it violates simple pieces of Scripture. Like the Bible says that no man will know the day or the hour. But people just ignore that. And they say, oh, we're not picking the day or the hour. Jesus said, the season, right? Because Jesus said, with the fig tree, it casts up with the figs, that it is even nigh, it is even at the door. It's like, well, we're not picking out when he's coming. We're just saying that, this is the season he might come. These could be the things that are going to it. So what happened then in 2008 to 2015? Because once you start like throwing out stuff, then you work yourself to go back and just find some event that happens to plug it in. It's like, okay, once you pick the date, all you then need to do is go back and to find any event to drop it in to make it fit. So what was the main thing that happened in 2008? There was a financial crisis, the housing market. So for those who advocate 7 years, that makes sense. It's like you had 7 years of plenty of prosperity. In the 2000s, you had like the dot-com bust in the early 2000s. Like, hey, you have all this plenty from 2001 down to 2008. That was like the 7 years of plenty. And now the 7 years of famine are about to come upon the land. So they went from 2008 to 2015. And of course, 2015, the event then that they were able to tie in was to say, well, look, the Pope is coming to visit America. And him coming to do so is like the capstone of that prophecy that was there in the book of Genesis. And of course, in Genesis, a number of principles that are wrong with it, but this is time setting. But they built it off of that. And so in 2015, this is what this is addressing again, the circulation, then that there would be a call then for Sunday observance and Sunday sacredness. Now, going back for a moment to the question that we initially asked at the beginning. Well, why was it then that she was saying that now is not the time? This is from 5th volume of the Testimonies, page 452. Says that the Sunday movement is now making its way in darkness. Now again, that would have to be in our day or the time it was written. So time is written. It's talking about, okay, what's taking place then? And again, to highlight it, when it's saying it's making its way in darkness, if I said it once, I say it twice, but I'll say it again. It is not saying that it's like a secret Jesuit agenda meeting that's like in the basement of the Senate somewhere. The statement itself clarifies what it's talking about. Much of what you hear today is people running forward and saying there's a secret meeting that took place over here to do this. There's a secret pact that's assigned over here. It's like, well, if it's so much of a secret, who's spilling all the beans? If it needs to be lock and key, then you need to do a better job of making sure that it is lock and key, because it's like getting out to the masses. So there's an expression that the Navy uses, loose lips sink ships. So who's like running their mouth if it's supposed to be like this clandestine and such a covert operation? Who is speaking? It's not dealing with making its way in like darkness in that respect. But the Bible uses the terms of light and darkness. And when it speaks about light, what is it addressing? It's talking about like physical light? No, it's talking about like spiritual light. It uses the term of darkness. Is it talking about physical darkness? No, it's addressing spiritual darkness. Now, it could be literal darkness, could be literal light, but the context, when the Bible said in Isaiah that the people who sat in darkness, they saw a great light. Was it saying that the people in Nephilim, that they had no light there? No, they were sitting in spiritual darkness. Light was to come upon them. Similarly, the Sunday movement is now making its way in darkness. The leaders are concealing the true issue, and many who unite in the movement do not see themselves whether the undercurrent is tending. Second sentence clearly explains the first sentence. That the leaders are concealing the true issue. So because they're concealing the true issue, it is hence making its way in darkness. They're not like the true issues that were there when this was written. Then, of course, the 1880s and 1890s. Though the call for the call for enforcement was it would bring about morality. It would strengthen the homes. It would strengthen the families. The true nature of what it would ultimately end up doing is that it would bring about persecution. It will bring about unrighteousness. So the leaders are concealing the true issue, and many who unite in this movement do not themselves see whether the undercurrent is trending. Its professions are mild and apparently Christian, but when it shall speak, it will reveal the spirit of the dragon. How so? Because it will look like a lamb, but it will speak as a dragon. So it will seek to afford then worship, that we will worship a certain way, but then to those who are dissenters, those would be persecuted. They would be punished for that. It is our duty to do all in our power to avert the threat and danger. We should endeavor to disarm prejudice by placing ourselves in a proper light before the people. We should bring before them the real question at issue, thus interposing the most effectual protest against measures to restrict liberty of conscience. We should search the scriptures and be able to give the reason for our faith. So we ought to use it as an opportunity then of being able to share, to educate, so that others will be able to see. So that, hey, you feel that this is to promote stability. But the scriptures and history testifies that whenever church and state unite, it inevitably always will bring persecution to those who are in the minority. So use this as a means to be able to educate, to be able to enlighten, to be able to teach. Why else would it be not the time? Now, Matthew 24 and verse 15 and 16. It says, "And when you therefore shall see the abomination that maketh desolate, spoken of by Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, and whoever reads, let him understand, and let him which be in Judea flee into the mountains." So this is very clear in Matthew 24, that when the abomination that maketh desolate, when you see him coming and standing in the holy place, then that was a sign for those who were there to flee. The literal fulfillment, of course, of it in Matthew chapter 24, if you consider Jerusalem there and what Jesus told them, they were to leave out of the city beforehand. They were being able to go out, to go to teach all nations and such. So now he is telling them that in this particular moment, when you see these events take place, this is the sign now to flee. What was that event? It said, when the abomination that maketh desolate standing in the holy place. The abomination that maketh desolate, of course, is referring us back to pagan Rome. All right? When pagan Rome was coming on the outskirts of Jerusalem, surrounded, and he was not saying coming inside the Jerusalem. If he was saying, when you see them in Jerusalem, that's time to leave, how would they leave? They couldn't. It would be impossible. So it was when they were on the outskirts, on the outsides of the city, they were able to see them coming when they saw the ensigns, the banners that they wore or carried with these pagan insignia. That was going to be to the believer the sign that this is the abomination of desolation that Daniel talked about. It's now time for us to flee from Judea. All right? This was the moment that they were to flee. How does that then apply then to the modern time? Because in Matthew chapter 24, that is a prophecy that Jesus gave that would go to the end. The apostle said, well, what are the signs of your coming and the signs of the end of the world? So how does this then apply then to the end? Well, we would apply it to the end when we also must understand the same thing. That there would also be then this abomination that maketh desolate, that's standing in the holy place. So basically you have something that is pagan being put somewhere that is sacred. And when you see that pagan being put where something that is sacred, then that is a time then that now it is time to flee. Right? For those who are in Jerusalem, it is now time to flee. That does not suggest that if the National Guard is in a city, that this is a fulfillment of this text. That does not suggest that if there's a military exercise in a city, that this is a fulfillment of this text. Yea, even if martial law were, quote, declared, that is not suggesting that that is a fulfillment of the text. Volume 5, page 464. The time is not far distant when, like the early disciples, we shall be forced to seek a refuge in desolate and solitary places. As the siege of Jerusalem by the Roman armies was the signal for flight to the Judean Christians. All right, so we know we're talking about the same thing then, right? As the siege of Jerusalem in Matthew 24, that's what this is foreshadowing. When Jesus prophesied it, it was in 64 AD that Cestus' armies came and they were beginning the siege around Jerusalem. And the siege lasted for several years. They withdrew their forces, and when they withdrew their forces, then that was the opportunity for them to be able to flee. It was later destroyed when Titus came back a few years later. So here's our comparison. It says, as the siege of Jerusalem by the Roman armies was the sign to the Judean Christians to flee, so the assumption of power on the part of our nation and the decree enforcing the papal Sabbath will be a warning to us. In plain English, when Sunday is made sacred in the halls of Congress, that is a sign then to leave the cities. Let me go back and read that once again. So the assumption of power on the part of our nation in the decree enforcing the papal Sabbath. Again, please notice the decree to enforce the papal Sabbath. Aha. So now we have like a key to unlock the puzzle. What is the key? Well, the key then that we have to be able to unlock the puzzle is looking at Matthew chapter 24. It says it would then be time to leave the large cities, preparatory to leaving the smaller ones for retired homes and secluded places among the mountains. Now, that does not discount the ability of anyone at any time to be able to go and to move wherever a person wants to move. Okay? But what it is highlighting, though, is that this is a specific event that is now an opportunity or a wake-up call for those who can to flee out. Does that make sense? Like, okay, you can leave before him. The Judean Christians, they didn't have to, quote, stay in Jerusalem prior to this. They could leave. If they so desire, if they wanted to move elsewhere, hey, go for it. But when there was the things that were coming, and what was the point being that, well, when the armies will come in to seize Jerusalem, those who were in the inside were going to suffer. So he wanted to avoid and to alleviate their suffering and their pain, so that when you see that, then now is the time to come. So if you haven't left prior, when you see this, this is the event that was prophesied, it is now time to go. In like manner, the siege of Jerusalem was a signal to the Judean Christians, so the assumption of power on the part of our nation in the decree enforcing the papal Sabbath will be a warning to us. It will then be time to leave the large cities, preparatory to leaving the smaller ones for retired homes and secluded places among the mountains. So, like, that would be the time that you're leaving the cities as Los Angeles, London, New York, Hong Kong, preparatory to leaving the smaller ones. The smaller ones may be like the Sacramentos, the Rosevilles, the Stocktons. Again, you can put whatever. It's not, the point being is that one is to be able to leave the other. And then preparatory to leaving the smaller ones for retired homes and secluded places among the mountains. So ultimately, like the early church, God's church in the end will also be in the solitary places, in the rocks, into the mountains, like in the very end, prior to. But we've unlocked a little piece there that we have to come back to. And again, that is it's not symbolism. So please do not go and say, well, when you see the spiritual army surrounding spiritual Jerusalem, that is not what it's saying. It's written there in plain English. Oh, the United Nations that they are going to do, that is not what it is saying. It's written in plain English. When the papal power or the government shall enforce the decree. Review and Herald, March the 2nd, 1893. The people of the United States have been a favored people, but when they restrict religious liberty, surrender Protestantism, and give countenance to popery, the measure of their guilt will be full, and national apostasy will be registered in the books of heaven. The result of this apostasy will be national ruin. Again, going back to the fifth volume, page 451. It says that by the decree enforcing the institution of the papacy, in violation of the law of God, our nation will disconnect herself fully from righteousness. All right, so by enforcing the decree, the nation will fully disconnect herself from unrighteousness, as in Matthew chapter 24. So now you have that which was pagan to be put in the place of that which is sacred, meaning now we're saying, all right, you must worship solely on this day to the exclusion of others. And if you don't, then you are punished accordingly. When Protestantism shall stretch her hand across the gulf to grasp the hand of the Roman power, when she shall reach over the abyss to clasp hands with spiritualism, when under this threefold union our country shall repudiate every principle of its constitution as a Protestant and Republican government, and shall make provision for the propagation of papal falsehoods and delusions, then we may know that the time has come for the marvelous working of Satan, and that the end is near. So for those who are observing and taking note, it is when this threefold union has done this, and that our country repudiates every principle of its constitution as a Protestant and Republican government. And I highlight that because now the hands are being stretched forth over the abyss. All right? The overtures are being made between Protestant and between Catholic, between spiritualism and so forth. You see that threefold union of apostate Protestantism, spiritualism, and Catholicism clasping and joining hands together. But the question is, has the country repudiated every principle of the Protestant, as the Constitution, as a Protestant and Republican government? No. When does it repudiate every principle of its Constitution and government? When it enforces the institution of the papacy. I think I want to skip this for time. Maranatha, page 211, and this is written in the year 1899. The Sunday keeping is not yet the mark of the beast, and will not be until the decree goes forth, causing men to worship this idol Sabbath. The time will come when this day will be the test, but that time has not come yet. This is 1899. I looked at some of the history and shared some of that. I would encourage you to go and to look at it on your own. But again, it is stating that, all right, even in that time, it was not yet the mark of the beast. Why? because it was not enforced. Congress had taken no action on it. No one has yet received the mark of the beast. The testing time has not yet come. There are true Christians in every church and not accepting the Roman Catholic communion. None are condemned until they have had the light and have seen the obligation of the fourth commandment. But when the decree shall go forth enforcing the counterfeit Sabbath, the loud cry of the third angel shall warn men against the worship of the beast and his image, the line will be then clearly drawn between the false and the true. And those who still continue in transgression will receive the mark of the beast. Again, the context is, again, not, quote, a person knowing and saying, well, one day is holy and one day isn't, but the context is what? When the decree shall go forth, enforcing the counterfeit Sabbath. So it is, and she could say that no one has received the mark of the beast, because no decree had gone forth to enforce the counterfeit Sabbath. So in other words, if a person who says, well, I don't accept, quote, Saturday as a Sabbath, they have not received the mark of the beast. It is predicated upon one action. And what is that one action? That one action then is the enforcement then and the observance of Sunday sacredness by law. So I want to give 7 reasons why very quickly. And I'm going to list them up, go through, and I'll share a couple of points behind each slide. But I'm just going to list them here then for the convenience of time. The first thing, again, that my study has let me believe that she said, well, this is not the time now. The Blair bill never left committee. All right? So when we talk about it, you have to look at it within its context, like the historical time period and context. It never left committee. So putting it another way, it was something that came up, but it never even made it to the House of the floor of Congress to be voted on. So thus you might be able to look and to see, well, it hasn't come up and it made it to that point to where it could be even the possibility of being enforced. Like, meaning when in its committee, if it passes committee, then it could certainly, it could be brought to the floor to be voted on, right? But if we haven't made it past the first stage, then we might be overreacting over here. All right, so if it's in committee and you're saying, all right, now is the time to, quote, to leave the city, because this is it, then wait a minute, you're not even reading correctly what it says. It says that when it is enforced, okay, meaning, okay, it's passed and it's enforced, it has some teeth to it. So if I'm jumping up and making these decisions, but I'm not considering the whole context, I'm moving out of step. All right, number 2. There were state levels that we saw for Sunday legislation and so forth in different places, but a number of those were challenged. In some instances, in many instances, the Supreme Court would step in, but in some instances, as I also shared, that the local legislators would say, no, this is unconstitutional. They would vote to repeal it. Again, California was one of those states that had Sunday rest laws, and the Democrats came in office, and they repealed it, they overturned it. And by the way, please stop with the nonsense that people will suggest that, well, Republicans are going to be the ones to do Sunday, make Sunday sacred, because they like religious right. And the Democrats are not the ones. Anything, again, history. When you had these 1880s and 90s, I looked at the history of it. And you know what I found? I found that sometimes the House of Congress were majority Democrat, and sometimes they were Republican. Sometimes the president was Democrat, sometimes was Republican. It's irrelevant. Party affiliation is completely irrelevant. Oh, I can see how the Republicans would be the ones to be able to do it. Well, I can make that same argument for, quote, the Democrats. It is not about political party or political affiliation. State levels, they were chaotic, pushing back. Number 3, there was a strong legal constitutional headwinds against national Sunday legislation. So not only were the likes of A.T. Jones and such speaking against it, but there were other churches they were also opposed to it. So there was not this coalition that everybody was on the same page. Countless other churches were standing fast, saying, no, that is not religious freedom. They were against it. Again, highlighted number 4 a little bit, that many Protestants also spoke out against it. Baptists, Presbyterian, they were not in favor of it. Then we also see that the pushback was exceptionally strong, even by the public, because there were public people who were not necessarily religious. They're like, well, why am this being enforced on me? I just want to go out and make a living. I want to open up my barbershop on Sunday. Then we looked at the statements, of course, that Ellen White talked about of this premature alarmism. And then the 7th thing that I think is also most telling is that God was still holding back the winds of strife. In Revelation chapter 7, the winds of strife were being held back. I'm going to just skip down to number 7. I've talked about some of those things. I could send you the slides and so forth if you would like them. But again, I do want to highlight that primarily the Blair bill, it never left committee. That does not mean it was not a threat. So please do not misunderstand what I am saying. I'm saying it had not reached the level of, all right, this is on the floor, and it's really gaining traction. It lost it in that particular place there. But the reasons behind the push. It's Evangelism, page 575. It is true that we are commanded to cry aloud and spare not, and to lift up the voice up like a trumpet. Show my people their transgressions, and the house of Jacob their sins. The message must be given. But while it must be given, we should be careful not to thrust and crowd and condemn those who have not the light that we have. We should not go out of our way to make hard thrusts at the Catholics. For among the Catholics, there are many who are most conscientious Christians and who walk in all the light that shines upon them, and God will work on their behalf. Those who have had great privileges and opportunities and who have failed to improve their physical, mental, and moral powers, but have lived to please themselves and have refused to bear their responsibilities, are in greater danger and in greater condemnation before God than those who are in error upon doctrinal points, yet who are seek to live to do good to others. Do not censure others, do not condemn them. That's some of the thrusts that you start seeing in the 1880s and 90s in reference to some of the things in the publications. Like, hey, don't go out of your way speaking out against this group to say disparaging and negative things. Find a way to be able to come into contact, into relation with people, to disarm their prejudice so that they will know and understand what we believe, what we share, the faith that we hold, those things that are similar, but also, again, a strong advocacy for the opportunity for religious liberty. And again, noting that religious liberty is not something that is uniquely for, quote, Seventh-day Adventists. It is uniquely for the inhabitants of the earth. In Maranatha 2:66, it says that angels are now restraining the winds of strife, until the world shall be warned of the coming doom. But a storm is gathering, ready to burst upon the earth, and when God shall bid his angels to loose the winds, there will be such a scene of strife as no pen can picture. So one of the main catalysts there is that the world needed to be warned. The world was not warned. We need time so that they might know. The opportunity for us to be able to go forth into labor, to pray then that God would give us precious time. Volume 6, page 408, the restraining Spirit of God is even now being withdrawn from the world. Hurricanes, storms, tempests, fires, and flood, disasters by sea and land, they follow one another in quick succession. Science seeks to explain all of these. The signs thickening around us tell us of the near approach of the Son of God, but they are attributed to any other source other than the true cause. Men cannot discern the centennial angels restraining the four winds that they shall not blow on until the servants of God are sealed. But when God shall bid his angels loose the winds, there will be a scene of strife as no pen can picture. And then lastly, Review and Herald, December the 11th, 1888. We should especially seek God for grace and power to be given to his people now. God lives, and we do not believe that the time has fully come when he would have our liberties restricted. The prophet saw four angels standing on the four corners of the earth, holding the four winds of the earth, that the wind would not blow on the earth or nor on the sea nor on any tree. Another angel descending from the east cried to them, saying, hurt not the earth, neither the sea nor the trees, for we have sealed the servants of God in their foreheads. This points out the work that we now have to do, which is to cry to God for the angels to hold the four winds until missionaries shall be sent to all parts of the world and shall have proclaimed the warning against disobeying the law of Jehovah. But every conceivable thing that the enemy can bring against the people of God to hinder them in their work will be employed. The Lord, on the other hand, bids all to be awakened to watch, for it is while men slept that the enemy sowed tares. So the church then, she spoke and warned that there is still work to be done. Now, will that hold forever? No. Romans says that God will cut the work short in righteousness. That he's going to take the wheel of the reins into his own hands. He is ordering the affairs, so it is not necessarily people on earth making choices and decisions. Congress could meet today and say that they want to pass a law demanding Sunday sacredness, but if Jehovah says now is not the time, now is not the time. It is all in his hands. The destiny of nations then is within his hand. And so he wants everyone to have the opportunity. He wants everyone to become acquainted. He wants the missionary work to be able to go forward so that men may be able to hear and that may be able to understand. And it may then be that as those movements go forth, then the God may say, now is the time. Seal the servants of God in their foreheads. Ultimately, he is the one that is in charge of all the affairs in that transpire and that move upon earth and that also take place in heaven. And so we circle back again to where we started in the very beginning. In Psalms 23 and verse 4, the Bible says that even though that I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, then I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. It is our duty to do all in our power to avert the threat and danger. A vast responsibility is devolving upon men and women of prayer throughout the land to petition that God may sweep back this cloud of evil and give a few more years of grace to work for the Master. So where we sit today, again, there is no, quote, pending legislation. That doesn't mean we become indifferent. We know that there is that real threat that is there. There are some who espouse exalting and bringing in blue laws. So what should the church do? Then the church should pray. The church should work. The church should look, well, God, prepare us. Give us time. And then when we see those events transpiring, again, the church is not just to sit back idly and say, oh, well, this is what Scripture said would happen, so let it be. No, then the church then must again become active, become vocal, petitioning and pleading again for God to give grace and that he might sweep back this evil and give time that people might hear. Dear Lord, we thank you again for the moments that you've given to us that we could be able to talk and to share. Thank you so much for your word, and I pray that you would help us to go forth and to become better students, to carry the light that comes from you, from your word to the world that is in darkness. Thank you for giving some more time. Thank you for lengthening the days of our probation. Thank you for the gift of your grace. And to that which we have received, we also want others to be able to know that they could be prepared as well to see you, to meet you in peace. I pray again your blessing and your grace upon our lives. In Jesus' name we ask, amen.